Well, and here we are. And I think they should probably, if I have my other Zoom user notes, I'd say they could be a little quieter, right? That's always a little bit. But okay, moving on to things that are actually our work. Glad that everyone's here. We have our quorum to begin the meeting, and this is, of course, a subcommittee meeting, the Community Engagement and Funding Subcommittee of the Contra Costa County Racial Justice Oversight Body. Folks here, everyone are veterans of the process, so no need, I think, to orient, and we can jump right into our work if that feels good to everyone here, and look at our agenda. Why don't I share screen so that we have that in front of us? Okay, and folks are seeing this here. Great. Introductions, announcements, public comment. Let me ask if anyone else has before I might offer introduction announcement. Okay. Well, why don't I take a second to say that it's not on the agenda, and I don't know what action really, if anything, to take on, but I did feel like worth noting that I had been in attendance at I think it was the most recent Public Protection Committee meeting, where there had been follow-up on the question of, I think, really the county's ability in light of new legislation to be able to act in some sort of oversight role in relationship to sheriff's office, and that there was discussion on basically opportunities or what might be possible, and then what things would be required under the different sections. And we had a little bit of update on that at the quarterly meeting of our group, the oversight body. I think I would pass on my impression, and there were others, I think at least, Jill, I believe that you were there, and perhaps others were also at the meeting. Because we've had as a continued issue of concern, and one that was a recent recommendation regarding sheriff's oversight, plus the data forum, I was hearing from more than one person that this was something that is a significant concern. So just following up on that, I'd say that after the PPC meeting, I feel like it's stagnant. It's at the risk of just going away entirely, because my perception was that, and I think I'm bringing this up because I want to be corrected or others' perspective on it, but I felt that Supervisor Anderson's response at the end of the meeting was that she didn't believe it was needed for there to be something beyond what would be reporting, basically not to have an oversight role from community apart from having reporting, which is required, not optional. And that, if I recall my perception right, I'm relating my sense of this, and this is a summary. It's a recorded meeting, and there's the notes and all of that. That Supervisor Glover's comments at the end were, I'd characterize, it would be good to have this come forward at some point and to know where we might go, which, if it's not pushed further in community, that's basically dying in a subcommittee or in a committee, which wouldn't make its way to the Board of Supervisors for action. So I'm bringing that up as my temperature check on, or my perception of where community oversight of sheriffs stands. But, and perhaps I could invite anyone else who has a different perspective or other comments on this to weigh in?
I'm happy to jump in without causing a discussion. Given it's not on the agenda, this is announcements. I can announce at the last PPC meeting that Supervisor Anderson has done a significant amount of communication with the sheriff. As she's read the law, the legislation, and so as it's understood, the legislation makes the body the Board of Supervisors, and so any advisory body created would be reportable to the Board of Supervisors. And rather than add one more advisory body to the county, since we already have the Racial Justice Oversight Body, we already are in development of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice and doing a lot of work in these avenues, in these areas. The plan is for her at the next PPC meeting. The sheriff will be there. She invited community to share their questions and concerns to be included in the report. And with the assistance of the county administrator's office, they're putting together a report format that will be standard, that will be presented, I believe, quarterly at the Public Protection Committee. And of course, everything that goes through the subcommittees of the Board of Supervisors then go on to the full board. And so that would be a regular reporting, and it would allow the community to come and ask questions and discuss the report going forward. And so that's in development, and that bigger discussion will happen at the next PPC meeting, which is later this month. And so I guess that's just the gist of what I took away from that meeting, that things are moving forward, maybe not in the exact format that was originally requested, but I think that there's some really good reasons why that may not be the best avenue, but that there could be still get to the ends, which is that the community wants more information from the sheriff, more transparency, and the ability to ask questions. So that's where we're at this point in time.
Thank you, Jill. I appreciate you adding that context. And I am mindful also that this is not an agendized item, as I don't have any proposal for action. I was just basically giving an announcement of my experience, and you've also added, which I think is helpful. And again, being mindful that this is not agendized. If anyone wishes to make some comment on this, I think there's limited room for that. So if anyone wishes to, I invite that, and if not, happy to move on to the rest of the agenda.
You know, just as a point of clarification for process, because your announcement would have incited probably more discussion that folks would like to have, I would probably recommend that if you want to have a discussion item in a future agenda, that might be something you want to do, especially after the PPC meeting, when staff is going to return back with some updates about the reporting process and what that might look like. So that's just one recommendation there. I also want to share that you made some comments with regards to the data community forum. I think that's what I heard you speaking of as well. I would say that in the data subcommittee, we did have that agendized as a discussion item as well. And so we shared some thoughts and feedback. So again, those are items I think in the future, if you like to have a more thorough conversation and, you know, a lot for appropriate time for that, that can be agendized.
Thank you, Patrice. That's well taken. And if others find this of something continuing interest, then I think it would be worth having on a future agenda, and I'll leave it at that. So let me invite then, if anyone else has introduction, something or announcement to make, I'd invite anyone else on our subcommittee to share that. Okay, moving right along. Maybe I'll also say my enthusiasm, appreciation for at the quarterly meeting, the engagement of applicants for spots and how I thought engaged our group was, and that I'm pleased we've have 2 people that are being now recommended to the supervisors for consideration. So I see that as being a positive step for the oversight body as a whole, that we'll be moving toward hopefully our full number and some excellent candidates from my perspective. So let me ask if there's any public comment on any item that's not covered on our agenda. Cheryl, hi.
Hi, Jeff. On your last comment, I think that some of the people who applied for the 2 open spots, it may be good to reach out to them to participate or to attend these meetings, even though they weren't chosen to move forward, just because they have such interest in the oversight body, just to keep their interest up. I think it may be a good idea to reach out to me.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I saw Chris's response with the emoji or whatever we say reaction, and I have a similar reaction for sure. The ability to influence the conversation is sometimes just as much, if not more, as being the community member who's speaking to what the group is saying. So there's lots of opportunity, and yeah, there were some excellent candidates with, I was inspired by the number of people that were showing their interest and really seemed like they could be excellent candidates. Shall we delegate this? I mean, before I leave that, that would be great. And then it gets not taken. Could we consider maybe, again, it's not on the agenda, but the thought of why don't we maybe consider each of us following up with someone who had been, that's kind of my thought, would be to reach out to, for example, the other faith leader and to say, your perspective would be welcome at these meetings, the community engagement. So I hope you'll join us or something like that. What do people think?
I think that's a great idea. I would say I was furiously typing private chats during that meeting, kind of doing that and trying to, obviously, I think if you go back to the agenda and, toggle through the applications, I think folks' email addresses could be found there, if not in some easier format. So yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense to do it that way, and to be able to speak to folks. I'm happy to to continue trying to reach out as well, because I think the other thing is, like I kept trying to reiterate during the meetings, the end of the year, I mean, we are nearly at the halfway point of the year. It will be here before we know it, and we'll be looking for several folks to fill seats at that point. And so I think the more continuity there might be, because folks have been, in some of these meetings and have a sense of, sort of where things have gone and where they need to go. The more, the stronger, right, those applicants will be, and the stronger a position the body will be in. So.
Yes, agreement. Okay, well, then maybe in follow-up after this meeting and in preparation for the upcoming meeting, could talk about kind of delegating kind of one-on-one follow-up and then sending that out to the group and see if that resonates with folks, so that we don't have too much time passing and kind of interest can wane and we're able to capitalize on, we had this recent positive experience and it'd be really great to bring you in. More part of the conversation. So great idea, Cheryl.
Yeah, and I think, Jeff, what Chris was talking about, it would be good for them to see and to sit on like several of these committees so they can actually listening and then act or give input or whatever before it comes time to come into the interviews, because what I noticed from most of their applications, they haven't attended any of these meetings. Right? They haven't attended them. They know about the oversight body and everything, but they haven't attended any of them. So I think it would be good to invite them, and so they can see what they're signing up for or want to sign up for.
Yes, yes, and I think sometimes it just takes on the kind of psychological level of the sense we want you here, right? Because after the process, you can be like, maybe they didn't even want me to participate in this, and we do. So I think maybe just inviting, as you're saying, hopefully will encourage involvement. Great. So apart from that, other announcements before we move to, oh no, we're already at public comment. So thank you. Any other public comment? Got it. I'm still screen share, right? Or am I now? Okay, hopefully everything I was sharing was not confidential work product stuff. We're fine, fine. We're all on the appropriate screen. So, Jill, were you? Oh no, I wasn't sure. Got it, just saw you. We're good. Then that brings us to approval of the record of actions, which is pages 3 through 5. Scroll. Everyone who was there accounted for, anyone who is not, everyone feel okay? Talked about those positions, we went through that, of course.
If you could stop right there.
Yes,
If you look at number 3, it says Jill Ray shared that Measure X funds have been promised for both Essential and East County Youth Centers. That's supposed to be for both Central and East County Youth Centers, not Essential, although they are essential.
good catch. I'm glad you found. We could say for both this essential, central, no, we'll just at the correction you said. We know that they are essential. Thank you. And I'll just keep scrolling along. Let's see. All right. We've gone through. Anyone have any proposed changes beyond the one that Jill had caught? Not seeing any indication, then anyone willing to make a motion to approve the record of actions from last time? Pretty please. I'll make the motion. I make the motion to approve the record of actions from last time. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Marcus. Any discussion on the item before we ask for public comment on this item? No further discussion. Any public comment on approving the record of actions? Seeing none, ask for our calling the vote, please.
Jeff,
Yes.
Kiki,
Find my mute button, yes.
okay, Marcus,
Yes.
the motion passes unanimously.
Fabulous. Thank you. Then moving right along. Let me just scroll up to the very top so we see our agenda again. Standing agenda item, which is our update on JJCC. And Kiki, I'll invite you if you have info to share with us.
Can you scroll to the notes that you put in there? Because I believe that Ms. Patrice Guillory gave some updates while I was absent last time. And I think she covered it all, everything that I wanted to make sure of. So thank you, Patrice. Yeah, right there. Okay. Yeah, so Patrice covered the updates. As you know, the PICE committee now has a different schedule. So we actually meet again on the first Monday afternoon of June. But the sort of survey conversation that she alluded to and our work group plans are underway. I'm actually pretty excited about the method of surveying that I chose for our juvenile probation staff. I've received responses. Basically, I put together a Google document survey that asked just a handful of questions about identifying service gaps that we are noticing in doing casework with juveniles. And so it was as simple as I could probably put it, but it's turning out to be favorable because I received responses from almost everybody. And basically I prefaced it with, if you have worked on any juvenile cases in the last 90 days, can you respond? I've broken it down by the type of position that they have. So that would be intake, investigations, placement, community supervision, institutional supervision, and then supervisors and administrators. And then the place where their caseloads are typically from. So we have East, West, Central, South, all county, or maybe out of county. And then basically I asked them to consider what type of missing services they think might have prevented police or probation involvement altogether if perhaps they would have been introduced to the youth or family sooner. And so there's a whole list of choices and there was a selection for other. I will tell you that with more than 2/3 of the responses received, behavioral mental health services, mentorship are tied for number one with 76 of the respondents pointing out those two. And then a close second at 71% is extracurricular activities. So I thought that was interesting. I allowed some space for them to elaborate. There's lots of narrative responses about that where they've really broken it down further. And then I also asked for them to describe what barriers they believe are currently existing for services that are actually in existence. The top answer there was transportation issues. And then second to that, very close, was waitlist delays. I thought that was interesting. And then next, actually tied for waitlist, was that the service is unavailable in the area where it's actually needed. So I'm just sharing this to give you all a kind of a gist. And let me just pause that thought. I asked them for elaboration there as well. I got some elaboration there that I'll be sharing, and then any and all additional feedback that they might want to offer about service gaps or existing barriers. I'm excited to see the information, not excited about the problems, but excited to see the information because I imagine that the other agencies who are also working on this part of the work plan are going to get similar responses, right? From the DA's, office, from all the other agencies that are hopefully conducting this internal survey of their organization. And I think it's going to validate some stuff that we already kind of think we know about, where the service gaps exist. And hopefully this was kind of a semi-substitute for the fact that we didn't get a lot of responses to the provider survey that we sent out. So we're taking another stab at it from this angle with actually asking folks who are working the cases in our various departments what they're noticing, which I think is important. So we are all supposed to report our feedback and the results of our questioning of our colleagues at our next meeting on the first Monday in June. And then aside from that, and those specifics, which you guys are actually the first to hear, I believe that the other updates were talked about already in April. So hopefully I'll have more to discuss when we meet together in June.
Thank you, Kiki. I have thoughts and follow-up, but let me invite others. I mean, yes, Chris, I see your appreciation. Getting I think you're saying like pretty much 100% response back is terrific. That's really awesome to get that level of participation. So it's really reflecting a good capture and not kind of an unrepresentative start. So that's terrific. I guess I'll just jump in with, I'm encouraged to talk a little bit about my experience with representing clients in mental health context when you're saying that primary response is behavioral health related, and thinking, okay, well, I only have my anecdotal experience, but I'm practicing in the county. And right, I think, frankly, for the past few years, I've been kind of hesitant to weigh in on criminal justice matters in terms of practice in the county, because I've been doing civil representation. I'm only representing people in probate civil conservatorship court. And also now, and if I'm thinking of youth as including persons 25 and under, and I know definitions vary, but at this point I've had more than 3 folks be in positions where there are needed services, person clearly, from my perspective, and if you consider the documentation, the only reason that they're in competency proceedings, meaning there's a question of whether this person has the mental capacity basically presently to even respond to the charges. So when that's apparent, and in my experience, defense persons are pretty loath to go this route because it's going to mean a long, long time waiting to figure out what's obvious is the person's not mentally well. But that's a long intro to say, if it goes there, and that's only usually going there because it's obvious this person is never going to be made well. It's just not going to happen. When that happens, then there ought to be either a smooth transition to conservatorship referral, or if not that, at least getting the person to psych emergency through some sort of facilitated process. And I have now seen new criminal charges, people hurt on both sides, people on probation supervision, that this could have been avoided. And I'm talking young people. And I do think that in my experience, it's had, just like every other area of the system, it's had a racial justice or racial injustice component to it, is that if you have active family members who are on it, who have the ability to have the bandwidth to, during the middle of the day, talk to different providers and all that stuff, then you can get more consideration. And if you're not in that position, and that's more commonly persons who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and we know that there's that larger overlap of persons of color, then yeah, the people who are getting in the gap here from, this is known to all the different parties here, but we decide that psych inpatient doesn't admit, or we don't have the contract with these other places, and excuses. I mean, it was totally avoidable, and some very serious things can happen. So what does that mean? I guess I'm responding to the JJCC and saying, I feel like, thank goodness that Gigi is going to be a recommended person who can see all these linkages too. And I know that everyone on the call is aware of the different mental health components, but I'm seeing it as a conservatorship representation, which includes people that are sometimes even under 18. I've had more and more of those now that we're having overlap with the criminal justice or the juvenile system. So that's a little dispatch from my conservatorship mental health practice now. And I'm appreciating what your work and what everyone's doing with JJCC. Any other thoughts or input on our standing agenda item on JJCC before we move forward to other items on the agenda? Okay. Well, then let's move, or public comment on this item. Okay. I think that allows us then to move ahead. I'm going to jump back again once more to the beginning of our agenda packet, just as long as I can scroll there. Okay. Consider a direct request to the PPC regarding Community Capacity Fund. Attachment to page 6. Okay. Community Capacity Fund. This is our draft from last time. Most updated version. Chris, may I invite you to maybe lead in this item?
Yeah, so I think now that I'm looking at this, I think probably part of what needs to happen before there's the hopefully some direct engagement with the PPC is I think this group knows that you all want, or at least the conversation up to now has been about this sort of hybrid structure for the capacity fund that would just offer some people the first tier, which would be some, you know, relatively small sum of funds that they could use however is necessary to keep themselves going, while others would apply for a second tier or a much deeper tier of funding that also comes with some level of programming and supports to not only help fund their capacity, but also to sort of flesh out that capacity in terms of what competencies do you have as a local nonprofit or CBO that's looking to do this kind of work, potentially to partner with system agencies and so on and so forth. So I think that needs to be committed to writing, much like the guidelines that you have. However, the overall idea in sort of putting this on the agenda in this way kind of speaks to, I think, Jeff's overall point with the unagendized, you know, sort of discussion earlier, which is, you know, for me at least, I just want to make sure that you guys are able to, as much as possible, have your direct interactions and discussions with the PPC. I think, you know, most recently in terms of requests or actions that have been taken within the R job, right? They've been reliant heavily on the report, right? Like the final project report every year, and sort of giving a summation and some feedback in real time to, you know, saying this is what they've done without having, you know, these additional documents, this additional context, this additional sort of information and direct asks that I think could further flesh out what it is that you're asking for and make sure that there's some direct dialogue before any decision is made. And so with this, I think, you know, when I reported back, and others who attended sort of reported back on this particular item, you know, it seemed like the takeaway was, well, this is kind of lost steam, and we don't know where to go with it. But I think a lot of that was because I know all of this, you know, all of this context, and I have all this information, again, like even stuff that's not on the page right there, like this should be a hybrid model. That way it can reach quite a few organizations while we can really focus on and do deeper work with selected few who meet a different, you know, set of criteria. And, you know, we can do deeper work to make sure that, you know, these organizations are around and that we're able to partner with them. PPC doesn't know that because I'm giving a summation of what you've done. So I think there's a need to have that direct conversation. I think if you all will recall, in the quarterly meeting, I think Patrice spoke to, the fact that basically the process, I think, is, when the R job is ready to make a direct request like that, the ORJ can, I think, is going to be the entity is going to reach out to schedule those sorts of things and get those things on the agenda. And I just think that's something that you should think about doing with this, even if, and I mean, I think we all understand that it's unlikely, right, that if you do this and you're on the agenda for, say, the June meeting, probably what's not going to happen is that like some stamp that says funded is going to go down like immediately, right? But at least there will be some direct, information communicated, and potentially, if there are questions that need to be answered, if there are things that are incomplete that we haven't done, steps that we need to take, we'll have a sense of that. Because I think with this group, and I applaud, this thinking, sorry about the background noise, if y'all can hear that. But I applaud this group for saying, okay, so we know we want this, we know we want it to sort of function in these ways and for these groups, but the rest of putting this together is kind of beyond our purview and expertise, and we need to bring someone in. That's the request, right? It's like, can we get someone who could actually structure this and think through the right things to build it, working on it. And I think that's the right step, for this group, in terms of saying, okay, we think we have a sense of what theoretically it should be, and now there's some nuts and bolts that need to be put in place. So figuring out what you need to do to get there, I think is going to require some of that direct communication. And, this was just meant to be a space to talk about some of the things that we may need to do or that may be missing, and, hoping to, at some point in the near future, move this onto one of those, say PPC meeting agendas that, members of the R job can directly, sort of speak to, or, attach documents or whatever you need to do, right, to have that direct feedback loop about how to move this item forward. So that's why it's here.
Thanks, Chris. Before I chime in on anything, let me first say, welcome, Emilul. Glad you're with us.
Thank you so much. I apologize. I'm off camera. I'm in commute. Thank you.
No worries at all. Glad you've joined us. And then to see if others have thoughts on this agenda item related to Community Capacity Fund. I took the share screen off because I was trying to find the language from our quarterly meeting of the oversight body where we made the proposal for Community Capacity Fund technical assistance. I did find that, so why don't I just share the language, which I'm glad to remember or confirm that it included the two-phase hybrid cohort community capacity model. So when we made the request for funding, we made it in that sense. So at least that part was known at the time that we made the request. In addition to the guidelines, I think we kind of did this as a two-step thing, where initially we were saying we're thinking, a bigger first phase and then a more focused second phase. And then after that, we're talking about, well, if we're going to do this, what are exactly the guidelines for the thing to fill it out? Maybe long response to my thinking again. Sorry, with all this, where was I? I can see that I'm having people look in the wrong screen. There we were. If I think back to when this was first coming up in our group, that it was like the playbook is what Chief Emin Kraus did in Alameda. It seemed like this was right. If I'm remembering that there was a really robust program, and we had Jewel Legacy Group, which was a consultant there. And well, how do they move from conceptual to the next phase to get actually like a more thorough proposal that could be considered for funding, et cetera, because we're kind of in a infancy here. So maybe we have a meeting in between this meeting and the next, like a little kind of conferring with probation about those steps, and also having on our next agenda to basically see what can we learn now that we are where we are, and on this specific kind of decision point or milestone, when we've gotten this far, how did probation get to the next step? And there, I see Patrice's hand.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the Alameda County capacity building that you're speaking of, but we did through ORJ when it was first in county administrator's office, and then I guess maybe during the transition to probation is when the capacity building effort took place for the 8109 contractors. Is that what you're referring to?
I was, I think, aware of what you're mentioning, and if I'm just thinking back to like earliest time that I had connected with Chief Emmon Krause, her talking about the experience of having super robust funding, like a large number, I remember in millions, talking about, and she was at Alameda before, right?
Right.
So I think so, was saying, hey, you know, this isn't just like a theoretical thing. We had great success with it in Alameda. A lot of different factors, but at least that's, does anyone else have a memory of Chief Emmon Krause having this community capacity fund experience from Alameda County?
Hey Jeff, it's Melvin with probation.
Please, yes.
The chief definitely had talked about sort of the community fund in Alameda County, but she also talked too that, you know, their board committed, it was like $25 million or something that was sort of made available. And I think when you're looking at Alameda County's overall sort of budget, what they have in probation versus what we have in ours, it's a stark difference sort of in size and stuff. And so I think that's what the chief was sort of alluding to, as the resources in Alameda County were much greater.
Thanks, Melvin. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And even if I'm thinking, you know, whatever, proportional in scope, if we're 1.1 million and Alameda County is probably 10 million plus something. So, okay, if we're talking a tenth of the scale, how did Alameda County get from this stage of moving to something more substantial? But points well taken, and the infrastructure and all that stuff of, we gotta remember these are apples and oranges also. But still, if I'm trying to learn, if we're trying to make something informed to supervisors about, this is something based on a model, that's always kind of where I'm starting in the, and let me add the full agenda to the chat. Emily, I saw your note. Thank you, Chris. Okay.
Thank you.
Others' thoughts on this, on kind of how we might take next steps? Maybe even more largely other items as we're talking, this is another way to kind of be discussing how we interface with the supervisors to have, right? It's not even necessarily saying, and I think it's explicitly saying we shouldn't be trying to jump the line all the time. There should be a process where it's saying, hey, we've got other things coming up, and this is how you can get onto the one in the future. And it's appreciated and noted, I think, by all of us here. I just speak for myself that Jill, Elisa, you're here, and that's part of the process, right, of filtering the information and making the request. So yes, and I see your hand also. So please, Jill.
So, you know, I've heard about this, you know, the description is, I mean, it's a great description. It just, I guess it just, to me, lacks specificity, and especially because the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council has this sort of fund that has gone untouched because there's the community-based organizations. They can't seem to reach them, and connect with them. So I guess the question is, number one, where this funding would come from. You know, that's always the direct ask. Instead of saying we want money, like, where would this automatic nexus come from? And I guess just more specificity. I guess there's nothing in here that really says like that this has come up from the community and it's needed. You know, I mean, it's a great idea, don't get me wrong. And I think building capacity, and Patrice could talk about how that went with the work that was done previously. And I think that was really more toward the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. Patrice, was that the found?
No, so, and I.
That's a separate process.
Yeah, so what I put in the chat was the former AB 109 capacity building process or program, what have you. And it's very detailed. So I encourage everyone to, I don't want to belabor the point here. So I encourage everyone to look at that website, and all of it breaks down who are to apply, the application process, what the program all entailed. So that way you at least get a sense of what Jill is talking about with regards to the level of specificity with regards to the proposal you want to bring forward to PPC, because this will essentially be I would assume a report or formal proposal that you would want PPC to consider so that they could deliberate on next steps or where to direct staff to go next. Sorry,
Yes,
Jill, I didn't mean to
exactly.
take over your comment.
No, I appreciate it. You just said very eloquently everything I was trying to say. Is like, you know, an idea is one thing. It could be a great idea, but without the foundation of a proposal and a really specific, like, this is where we suggest the funding come from. This is where we request that it be housed, because, you know, right now ORJ is holding the RJOB, but I don't think that's ultimately the plan. And so having more specificity as to what that looks like, what organizations you're trying to work with, that sort of thing, and then what process they would go through. And I know ORJ now has that whole database where people can work toward evidence-based programming and get supports with that. So yeah, some more details, I think, is the challenge.
Yes. Thank you, Jill and Patrice. Maybe I'll just follow up on to the point of, it's not clear here, and it isn't in this little snippet, the history of it and where this has come from. So this is on our work plan because it was a specific recommendation of the Racial Justice Task Force that we, as our subcommittee, took on as one of our priority areas. So it's directly through that voting process and the vetting of all the different recommendations, and this community capacity fund comes directly from that language. And I know when we had this vote back in 2021 to make the proposal for funding technical assistance to the supervisors, there was much back and forth of, wait, are we actually talking about funding for this whole program? And we were saying, no, we're talking about like a meager amount of money, not meager, but I'm talking like less than maybe $10,000, not like a huge funding for a program. But Jill, to the point you're saying, well, who's going to house this and how is this looking? And we were looking at the time at the process and thinking, it's beyond my bandwidth to write that. And there's really, it would be on us as subcommittee members to write the proposal, which requires a certain level of sophistication. So the request we made and that was approved by the full RJOB at the quarterly was, okay, we are going to recommend a limited little piece of funding for whatever it would take to put together the skeleton of a proposal, which is probably something substantial as far as like a document. But then that would allow to move the process forward to actually make a real proposal to the supervisors for something. Because right now, it already took us a long time to create guidelines, which are not completed and is a one-pager. and doesn't have any of the sort of detail that you're talking about, Jill, of like, well, is that even realistic that one of these offices or departments could do this, and how will it look? And
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Jeff, at the risk of cutting you off, I will let you know that, as you know, the RJOB did make a recommendation to the PPC to find a home for RJOB data for collection and analyzing it. And so that will be going to the PPC in May. And so that was a pretty clear ask. I think it wasn't that way at first when it came out of the subcommittee, but the clear ask came through in the motion that really the request is looking for a home for all of this in the short term, because the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice doesn't appear to be lifting up very quickly. And so I think this sort of falls into that same category of, we sort of are stuck in this limbo. We've been waiting and waiting for the OR ESJ for a lot of different reasons. And I think this is one of them. It's hard because, I mean, Patrice, I don't know that you guys have the ability in ORJ to lift this up and to help them do this.
In terms of putting together a proposal?
Well, I mean, just in terms of a community capacity fund and doing that ask and, housing a consultant and that, I mean, it's a pretty big ask. I understand your meaning funding wise, it's not very big, but the whole process requires staff support. And I'm not sure that that is what the ORJ is able to do at this point in time, is to really move a lot of these ideas to the next step, because it will take significant staff support to do so. So not to speak for you, Patrice, but I'm just kind of getting that feeling like a lot of these ideas sort of keep simmering because there's no house for it.
Well, not only that, so thank you. And no, we don't have unfortunately, don't have the capacity to develop a capacity fund or proposal, but I do feel that, not to beat a dead horse, there is the previous AB 109 capacity building program. So you have some low hanging fruit here. You have a previous program that did take shape, which I think it would not take it's not a heavy lift to look at that and to decide how that would work for the kind of organizations you would want supported through this effort. So I, again, would encourage a review of that. There's also Measure X funding that was put aside not only for the creation of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, but then also for, I believe, innovation projects or a local innovation fund or something of that nature. I might be misquoting what the actual name is, but I felt like it was somewhat similar to what RJOB is looking at for this community capacity fund or things of that nature. So you have that as well. And also during the February update, when Chris did bring this up with a number of the other actions that this body took, I do remember Supervisor Anderson making a reference to the fact that this is probably something that is best held within the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. But again, to Jill's point, until it comes online, you actually have a really great opportunity to kind of help shape that, to make sure that then it does have a permanent place once that office comes to fruition. There's likely to be an update on the shaping of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice for June Board of Supervisors meeting. So hopefully we'll get more information there. But I feel that if your intention is to move this along, given that there are some kind of certain other elements that contribute to this that are in holding pattern, that means you have the room and the ability to create, to shape as you see fit, because there's really no vehicle right now that you can kind of jump on. There's just an open opportunity to make the time to build out a proposal that you want. And it sounds as if from PPC that there is ample opportunity to then present those ideas back and engage in discussion about what's the best path forward.
think that's well said, Patrice. Right, trying to take this as opportunity and see what we can do here. And certainly looking at the work that's happened in county makes a lot of sense as a starting point. So perhaps we can return to this for a future agenda. Our next steps in developing a proposal ourselves in light of what has happened already in county, and having that as perhaps first starting point. And if there's information at all to be learned from others nearby counties, that too perhaps, but let's start here as the first model, and that makes sense to me. Anyone else's feedback, thoughts on this?
I will note, I am taking all the BOS heat for Elisa, so you're welcome, Elisa.
Thanks for letting me have like an easy intro into the world. But one thing I do want to add, and this is more from just having worked with small nonprofits and CBOs, is that having the funds available to build capacity so that you're able to better serve your community is really important. And that's what I really like about what you're outlining here. I think that'll be a good tool. Getting the structures in place where you actually can identify funds, who's going to hold it, Jill, great suggestions, and definitely something that's necessary, because that's your structure for how you're going to function, years down the line. But I really do like overall program that you're putting together here.
Thanks, Elisa. And I welcome any other feedback, comments on this item before we move to the next. That's, of course, including public comment, or I'll invite public comment. I know we've had staff and elected representatives of our electeds. Not seeing anything further at this time. I think that would bring us to our Youth Advisory Council update. I mean, I'll say that we had that is potential for vote, the last item, and sometimes that's just making sure we can take action when we wish to. But I don't think at this time there was something really to be voting on as best, right? Just giving ourselves that capacity. So let's move ahead to the Youth Advisory Council update. And maybe if I remember at our last subcommittee meeting, we were thinking of this is maybe better able to take action on in the short term, might not have the same sort of obstacles exactly to move to the next step. And there's a plan in place to very shortly have a meeting that staff medley, right? If I'm remembering May 16th, we're going to have some folks coming together to talk about how we could move this forward. Maybe you know a little bit more detail than I do at the top of my head on this, Chris.
Yeah, just so the meeting is set for May 16th, like a small, mainly it's like folks from RISE who work directly with youth. And I think we're having it at the perfect time because folks are getting ready to get out of school. So theoretically, for a few months, there may be more time availability for, trying to build something that's youth led or get youth participation about what this should be, how to structure it, and also just sort of, we've looked at here in this meeting, we've looked at, sort of the ways that these have been structured in other jurisdictions and, stipended and all of that sort of stuff, and wanted to make sure that we, can honor folks' time with, some level of resources, which is something that, we've spoken about before. So we will be looking forward to having that meeting and giving you a more substantive update after that happens. It just so happened that it failed such that, for this update, basically what we can tell you is that there's a meeting next week to try to get a handle on, working directly with youth to build this and to hear from them, even in the process of its development, not sort of making what we think young people might participate in, even for the benefit of hearing directly from them on things that might impact them, but making sure that, you know, they're part of even that development to ensure that we actually make something relatable and accessible and that youth want to participate in. And I think, you know, at some point on Cheryl's earlier point, it might be just an idea, certainly not something that there's any plan to do anything with at this point. But, you know, we had a high school sophomore who was applying to be on the Our Job, and based on the work, you know, that she was talking about doing with the organization that she helped create and who they serve, she might also be a good person to reach out to, not just to show up to meetings when possible, but also just to be a part of helping to develop and recruit even young people to participate in this. So I think that's a worthwhile potential connection to think about as this begins to take shape.
Thanks, Chris. You saw my thumbs up on that. But yeah, definitely an inspiring young person, that was applying. And that would be terrific to try to bring her energy, her perspective to that process. And I'm glad that May 16th isn't so far away that that's a next step we're talking about. Anyone have thoughts, questions, input on this agenda item as we're talking about how we might move forward and really prioritize this as our work plan, perhaps number one campaign? Gotta enjoy a nice pause from time to time. Isn't that good?
Didn't that already happen though? I feel like when we looked at the work plan and we were thinking about priorities, I feel like folks then may have voted even and expressed interest in moving that ahead as one of the priorities. So I think you have a lot of agreement there already.
Yes, that's true. And I think I was just saying that awkwardly, is that we did designate it already, but now that we've just had this comment, does anyone want to kind of chime in as where we stand presently? But you're right. And I see Jill's hand.
The only question that I would ask is, did anybody reach out to the Employment and Human Services Department person who's overseeing the development of the 2 youth centers to see if there's any coordination with that effort and building building conversations in the community and getting youth involved?
Seems like a relevant question to me. I know that kind of my engagement in this has been leaning heavily on Steph Medley for expertise on what's going on the ground with the related orgs. And I see also question from Imlul to any youth. I don't know the answer, how that's coming together or sort of invited participants. Do you happen to know on that, Chris, and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, sure. It's just meant to be a huddle to figure out how we're gonna, you know, build this, or like what youth we can reach out to. So I think if there are youth who want to attend it directly, that's helpful. I can just send the invite, so I can send it to you.
Other thoughts you might have had on that, Imolol? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just wondering if.
No, I'm in contact with lots of youth, some of whom live in Contra Costa. So I just, they're chomping at the bit to get involved in things. So I'm just trying to find things to give them voice.
Well, I appreciate that, the question, and that you can be sharing some of these opportunities. Well, I think we're near the last points of our agenda, right? If there's any further public comment on this agenda item, that brings us to next steps. Got a nice cushion in time here. We got just about 20 minutes, which we don't need to spend all of them, right? Just saying that if there's points that people want to be taking at this moment, to be thinking, all right, how do we move this forward? Next steps is a point at which, right, we could be talking about delegating outreach to some of the applicants. I said that we could do that offline, and we could, but everybody, right? Are we agreeing everybody who applied? I think it makes sense. I mean, even those, I think, who took their name out of consideration. If you filled out the application, it's a pretty strong interest in work that we're doing all together. So, right, my thought is that we would just reach out to people and encourage participation, joining us for a future subcommittee meeting. I see Cheryl's hand, and Chris, you'd unmuted.
Jeff, let me ask you a question, or let me ask all of you a question, because the comment about getting youth involved, right? And I got a few of them in my house who fall into that category of, you know, they 24 and under. And I think that knowing a little bit about them, they don't just get involved, right? And you can't just go to them and say, I want you to get involved. They need something with some structure around it, with some build around it, with an actual ask, with an actual, I mean, most adults are like that, right? They need to know, okay, the who, what, when, where, how, and how's it going to affect me? How's it going to, you know, they need to be motivated by something, and they need to have an actual something in it, right? So what's the it? What is the draw? As adults, we think we need a draw. We need something that motivates and keeps us in a movement. So what is the movement in it for the young people? They may come to it because of some emotional thing that's happened to them or their friends, but they won't stay in it. So what is it? What are we asking the youth to get involved? Because we keep saying get the youth involved in it, but what is the it? And so I haven't heard what that it is yet, because mostly what we talk about at all of these meetings that I attend is theoretical or it's paper, right? It's paperwork and data and theoretical, and it's at a level that that's why they won't sit still. They're not going to sit still for these kind of meetings. I know mine won't, and they're very civic oriented, but they need something. So when I got them involved in the youth rally for climate justice, they were very happy. They could do that. They'll spend an hour, you know, for a social justice rally. They'll spend an hour for the climate justice rally. And there was like 80 or something children who showed up, young people, on a Saturday, in the middle of the day, on a Saturday, on 80 degrees outside for a climate justice rally. And then there were a couple hundred of them that showed up in Oakland for a social justice rally. So I think it has to have something in it, and it's got to be active. So I'm just asking us to think creatively about what the it is, and then how do we grab their attention from their aspect to make them want to participate in it, not to sit around at a screen when they've been sitting around at a screen all day, either for high school or college or something like that, because they're not going to work. That was it.
Thank you, Cheryl. Grounding us and right, what's the overall purpose of what we're doing and kind of coming back to that. I'll chime in to say my memory of like when we first got on this path was, of course, being mindful of not deciding what the thing is for someone else, right? If we're thinking about this being a youth-led project, then can't be us deciding what it is, but kind of considering it as something like the oversight body or something like the JJCC, which doesn't have a spot for youth representative or spots for youth representatives, but everybody who's appointed, everyone who's on that body would be youth, and that they would have the direct line of communication to the supervisors, just as we do. And we make a recommendation and it's agendized and it's official, and it's not kind of an opportunity to give your input to the people who are appointed, but you're the ones who are appointed. You decide what the agenda is. Ish, right? And that's not me saying what it is as much as just kind of my memory of what do I even think we're doing here? And that's kind of what I think that this would be going toward. I'm interested what others remember, think of as we're talking about this.
I think that's right, but I also think the point is well taken, right? I think the point is, while we were thinking about something like that, and we did want to, have some youth-led like events to sort of lead up to that, or to sort of facilitate that. I think even the thing itself, and as you said, Jeff, it's not up to us to make the ultimate determination of that, because we wouldn't be participating, but more supporting it. But I think even the thing itself, right, it's not very, if I'm a young person, right, and I'm sitting on this meeting and you say, yeah, we were thinking about like basically a youth version of this, I'm gonna find something else to do, right? So we do need to make sure that it's interactive, in some meaningful ways. And I think, I think our colleagues at the RISE Center can help with some of that, just based on the programming and the level of resources that they have and have been able to build, as well as, any young people who may participate in that meeting or any other meetings that we'll inevitably have after that, in terms of how do we build something that has enough energy and enough interactivity and action to it, in addition to sort of sitting with, well, we want to propose this to the Board of Supervisors. What do you think about that? Is that something that you would approve of? What questions do you have? What edits or revisions? Definitely, the main thing that we're thinking about is very important to have a youth voice on that, but also for it to be interactive and maybe even social enough to make them actually want to show up and spend some of their time doing interactive social things, and some amount of that time sort of sitting with these larger questions that we'll be sort of posing to them.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, this is kind of filling out, it's putting people in power, but it's got to be in a way that it's actually going to be interesting and engaging and realistic, that we're putting something out there that will be sufficiently interesting. There'll be the incentive to participate. So maybe that'll inform, I think it will inform my engagement, and Chris, probably your engagement, if we're going to be having this meeting on the 16th and reporting back a little bit. We talked about this in our subcommittee, and this is the tenor of the stuff that we were hearing. And what do y'all think? So yes, we've had some feedback on this. Maybe just before transition to adjourning, I suppose, are there any other next steps that people want to speak to? I'll open the mic for that. And say my appreciation for you all. Onward in this work. There's lots of different campaigns going on in different fronts, and we'll just continue to encourage each other through this. And I'll say I'm willing to adjourn this meeting if I don't hear any objection. 10 minutes to spare. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.